Nobody warns you about the specific kind of shame that comes with a debt that isn't yours. The way it sits in your chest like something swallowed wrong, heavy and stuck. Naya found out on the Tuesday. She'd come home from her part-time shift at the convenience store, backpack still heavy with anatomy textbooks, and nearly stepped on the envelope that had been slid under the door. No stamp, no return address, just her name written in handwriting that meant someone had taken their time, which was somehow worse than a scrawl. The letter was short. Her father, David Owens, had used her name and her address as guarantee on a loan taken 8 months ago. The amount made her sit down on the floor right there in the hallway. She didn't even make it to the couch. She was 19. She had a first-year pre-med course she was barely keeping up with, a sister in secondary school, and 43,000 won in an account she'd been quietly proud of building. That pride curdled fast. She spent that night and most of the next day making calls she knew would go nowhere. Her father's phone was disconnected. His last known address led to nothing. She called a legal aid line, was put on hold for 40 minutes, and hung up. There was no version of this where the math worked in her favor. Her father had borrowed against her name and vanished, and the debt had settled on her shoulders like it belonged there. The man came on Wednesday evening. Polite enough. A suit that cost more than 3 months of her rent. He stood in her doorway and explained, in the tone of someone reading a grocery list, that she had 48 hours to present herself to a Mr. Li Huan with a repayment proposal, or the matter would be escalated. He didn't define escalated. He didn't need to. After he left, Naya stood in her small living room and stared at the wall. Lena was at a friend's place. The apartment felt very empty and very loud at the same time. She thought about running. Mapped it out properly, the way her brain did with problems. Then she thought about Lena and set it aside. When they came back 47 hours later, she opened the door, looked the man in the eye, and said, "Let's go." Li Huan's penthouse was not what she expected, which bothered her more than if it had been. She'd braced for something cold, all steel and sharp edges, the kind of space that announces power by making you uncomfortable in it. Instead, it was warm-toned and quiet, with low lighting and furniture that looked chosen rather than arranged. It smelled like cedar and something faintly citrus, clean without trying to be. A woman named Ji Yun showed her to a room, handed her a schedule, and left without small talk. Naya appreciated that. She had 20 minutes before she was summoned. Li Huan was standing at the window when she was shown into his office. He didn't turn immediately, which she recognized as a move, a small assertion that his time organized itself around itself, not around her arrival. She stood and waited, and when he finally turned, she kept her face still. He was younger looking than she'd expected, composed in the way that suggested it wasn't effort anymore, just habit. He looked at her the way someone reads a document, thorough, giving nothing away. He gestured to the chair across from his desk. She sat. He laid it out without preamble. 8 months. She would manage the household, scheduling, correspondence, coordinating staff. She would be paid a stipend. The debt would be frozen for the duration. At the end, provided she'd fulfilled the terms, it would be cleared entirely. He slid a single page across the desk. Naya looked at it. Then she looked at him. "And if I leave before the 8 months?" "The debt reinstates, with interest." She nodded slowly, like she was filing that away rather than reacting to it. She looked back down at the page. "This doesn't list your expectations beyond the job description," she said. "I want those in writing too." Something moved across his face. Not quite surprise, more like the micro-adjustment of someone recalibrating. "Nothing beyond what's written," he said. Then put that in writing as well. A pause. He held her gaze for a moment longer than necessary, then reached for his pen. She watched him add the clause, sign it, and slide it back. She signed it without letting her hand shake. It didn't, which she was privately grateful for. She'd been there 9 days before she understood the rhythm of him. Li Huan woke at 5:30. He was at his desk by 6, coffee already made, black, no sugar, by whoever had the early shift. He took calls between 8 and noon, ate lunch at his desk more often than not, and was unreachable between 2 and 4 in the afternoon, for reasons nobody in the household seemed willing to explain and Naya didn't ask about. By evening, he was either gone or so quiet in the penthouse that you could forget he was there at all. The staff moved around him like water around a fixed point. Careful, practiced, never quite relaxed. Naya moved around him like herself, which appeared to be the problem. It wasn't intentional. She just didn't have the energy to perform caution she didn't feel. She did her job cleanly. The schedules ran tighter than they had before she arrived. Ji-yeon had said so with what might have been reluctant approval, and she stayed out of spaces that weren't hers. But she didn't lower her voice when she spoke, and she didn't find reasons to leave a room when he entered it, and apparently that was notable. On the 9th day, he came into the small office she'd been given and stood in the doorway. "You reorganized the vendor contacts," he said. "They were filed by name. I filed them by frequency of use. It's faster." "I didn't ask you to do that." She looked up from her laptop. The job description said correspondence and coordination. That falls under coordination. "If you want me to put it back, I will." He looked at her for a moment, then at the filing system pulled up on her screen, then back at her. "Leave it," he said. He was almost at the door when she spoke again, not looking up this time. "You're welcome." The silence that followed had a texture to it. She kept her eyes on her screen, but she felt him stop, felt the small shift in the room. When she finally glanced up, he was gone, but the corner of the door was still moving. She turned back to her work and said nothing to the empty room. But something about her mouth was not entirely straight. The dinner was in Gangnam, on the 14th floor of a building that had no signage and didn't need any. Li Huan told her 3 days in advance, which she appreciated. He told her it was a private business dinner, that she would be present as his household manager, and that she should dress accordingly. That was the entirety of his instruction. She bought a dress the color of burnt sienna from a second-hand rack near her old neighborhood and told herself it fit the brief. It did more than that, but she wasn't thinking about that when she put it on. The car ride was quiet. He smelled like warm vetiver and black pepper, something grounded and expensive without announcing itself. She looked out the window and said nothing. So did he. The room they walked into was small by event standards, maybe 30 people, low music, the kind of catering that came on slate tiles instead of platters. She stayed a half step behind him, which was where she'd decided she belonged in this context, professional and unobtrusive. She was fine until a man named Choi something or other found her by the drinks table. He was charming in the immediate, surface way that some men weaponized effortlessly. He asked how long she'd worked for Li Huan. He asked where she was from. He let his eyes do things his mouth was too smart to say out loud. Naya answered what she chose to answer, and angled her body slightly away, which most men took as an invitation to try harder. She didn't get the chance to handle it herself. Li Huan appeared at her side, not rushing, not making a scene, and placed his hand at the small of her back. Warm, unhurried, like it was simply where his hand went. Choi. His voice was pleasant. "I need her." The man smiled, excused himself, and left. Just like that. Li Huan didn't remove his hand immediately. 2 seconds longer than necessary. Then he did, and they walked toward the other side of the room, and he said nothing about it. Neither did she. But in the car on the way home, the silence between them was a completely different thing than it had been on the way there. They both knew it. Neither of them touched it. She found the envelope on the kitchen counter at 7 in the morning. Her name on the front, same unhurried handwriting as the first letter that had upended her life. Except this one didn't make her sit on the floor. This one made her very still in a different way. Inside was enough to cover Lena's school fees for the remainder of the year. No note, no explanation. Just the money and the silence of a man who was probably already at his desk, pretending he hadn't done anything. Naya stood in the kitchen for a long moment. Then she went and knocked on his office door. "Come in." He didn't look up immediately. She walked to the desk and set the envelope down in front of him. He looked at it, then at her. "I can't take this," she said. "You already have. It's been transferred." "Then untransfer it." He leaned back in his chair and looked at her with the particular patience of someone who had already decided how this conversation ended. "Lena's fees were overdue by 3 weeks. You've been sending her money from your stipend and eating half portions so the numbers work. I noticed." The fact that he'd noticed, that he'd been paying that kind of attention, did something to her composure that she didn't have a word for yet. "That's not your problem to fix," she said. Her voice was steady. She was proud of that. "No," he agreed. "I fixed it anyway." "Why?" He stood up then, and the office suddenly felt like it had less air in it than before. He came around the desk slowly and stopped close enough that she had to decide whether to hold her ground or step back. She held it. "Because you won't ask for help," he said quietly. "And you needed it. And I was here." She looked at him for a long time. The composed, observant part of her was cataloging everything. The steadiness of his gaze, the way he was waiting without pressure, the fact that for once he looked like he wasn't performing calm, but actually feeling it. She decided something. She reached up, closed the small distance between them, and kissed him. He responded like he'd been waiting, one hand rising to her jaw, unhurried, certain. It wasn't brief, and it wasn't frantic. It was the kind of kiss that had the weight of weeks behind it. When they separated, neither of them spoke. She looked at him. He looked at her. "The envelope stays," he said finally. "I know." The morning after the kiss, Li Huan was at his desk by 6, as usual. Naya was in the kitchen by 6:15, as usual. Everything looked the same. Nothing was. She gave it 3 days before she admitted to herself that she was pulling back. Not from him exactly. She still did her job, still moved through the penthouse without shrinking. But from the thing that had started to grow between them. She stopped lingering, stopped letting conversations run past what was necessary. When he looked at her for a beat too long, she found somewhere else to be. On the 4th day, he came and found her. She was in the small sitting room off the main hall, cross-legged on the floor, with her anatomy notes spread around her, when he appeared in the doorway. He looked at the notes, then at her, and sat down in the chair nearest to where she was, without asking. She waited. "You're avoiding me," he said. "I'm studying." "You're doing both." She set her pen down and looked at him directly, because that was the only way she knew how to do anything. "The contract is still running," she said. "I'm still here because of a debt. I won't pretend that's not the situation." "I'm not asking you to pretend anything." "Then what are you asking?" He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, His voice was measured, but underneath it was something unguarded. I'm asking you not to decide this is nothing before it's had the chance to be something. She looked at him for a long time. You're 31, she said. I'm 19. I'm sitting on your floor studying because my father sold my name to pay his debts. You have to understand why I'm not just going to fall into this. He nodded once. No defensiveness, no rushing past it. I understand that completely, he said. The age is real. The situation is real. I'm not asking you to ignore either. I'm asking you to let me show you that I know the difference between what's convenient and what I actually want. The room was very quiet. He leaned forward and kissed her once. She didn't pull back, slowly, and pulled back before it became anything more. A statement, not a demand. I can wait, he said. I just needed you to know I'm not going anywhere. She finished the 8 months on a Friday. Ji-Yun made tea in the morning like it was any other day. The schedule ran like it always did, and Naya packed her things, slowly and without drama. One bag, same as she'd arrived with. She'd accumulated almost nothing, which felt intentional in a way she hadn't examined too closely until now. Li Huan found her in the hallway at noon. She had her bag over one shoulder and her anatomy notes tucked under her arm, and she was fully prepared to be professional and clean about this. She'd rehearsed it. Thank you for honoring the arrangement. She'd even practiced her handshake. He was holding a document. The debt is cleared, he said. It was cleared 3 weeks ago, actually. I should have told you sooner. She stared at him. 3 weeks? I kept finding reasons not to bring it up. She set her bag down slowly. Li Huan. I know. That's not... I know, he said again, quieter. I'm telling you now because I don't want there to be anything between what I'm about to say and the truth. He set the document on the side table beside him. You're free. The debt is gone, the contract is done, and you owe me nothing. That's not the conversation I'm trying to have. Naya looked at him. 12 years between them, a debt that wasn't hers, 8 months in his world, and he was standing in the hallway, looking at her like she was the only fixed point in a room that was moving. Then what conversation are you trying to have? She asked. I want you to stay, he said. Not in the contract, not with conditions. I want you to stay because you want to. You're the only person in my life who has never adjusted themselves to make me more comfortable. I didn't know I needed that until you. The silence stretched. She let it. Then she set her notes down on top of her bag, crossed the space between them, and put her hand flat against his chest. She felt him breathe. Lena's fees, she said. Something broke open in his expression. Done. And you tell me things. Actually tell me things. Yes. She looked up at him. Okay. He pulled her in slowly, arms around her properly, and she let her forehead rest against his jaw. No urgency, no performance. Just 2 people in a hallway on a Friday, choosing each other quietly and completely. She didn't pick her bag back up. She didn't need to.